In this video, we're going to go over the history of the PlayStation 1 and how it was a vital part of the gaming console wars.
The games are ready.
The Sony PlayStation, a stunning new generation of interactive entertainment.
The #1 video game platform.
It just fired everybody's imaginations.
The market just became absolutely non-stop and changed forever when the PlayStation arrived.
It began with a betrayal. On a summer day in 1991, Sony executive Olof Olofsson stood on stage at the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, proudly announcing Sony's partnership with Nintendo to create a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The collaboration promised to revolutionize gaming by combining Nintendo's expertise with Sony's cutting-edge CD technology. The next morning, however, Nintendo blindsided Sony by announcing they had abandoned their agreement in favor of partnering with Philips instead. This public humiliation would spark one of the most consequential pivots in gaming history, the birth of PlayStation. Ken Kutaragi, an ambitious Sony engineer who would later be dubbed the father of PlayStation, had been working with Nintendo since 1988. Initially, Kutaragi had created the SPC 700 sound processor for the SNES through a demonstration that impressed Nintendo executives. His audio chip became a key component of Nintendo's 16-bit console. Kutaragi's willingness to work with Nintendo stemmed from his admiration of the Famicom and his conviction that gaming consoles would become the primary home entertainment systems. When Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi betrayed Sony, Kutaragi was furious. He approached Sony president Norio Oga and convinced him that Sony should develop its own console to compete with Nintendo. Oga chaired a pivotal meeting in June 1992, where Kutaragi unveiled a proprietary CD-ROM system he had been secretly developing. This system featured impressive 3D graphics capabilities that exceeded what was currently available in home consoles. While Kutaragi's presentation impressed Oga, other Sony executives remained skeptical. Older board members viewed Nintendo and Sega as mere toy manufacturers, and believed Sony should maintain its position as a leader in the audiovisual industry. These executives preferred negotiating with established companies rather than competing in what they perceived as a culturally distant gaming market. Nevertheless, Oga backed Kutaragi's vision and became one of his strongest supporters. On October 27, 1993, Sony officially announced its entry into the video game console market with the PlayStation. According to Shigeo Maruyama, an executive who later became a vice president of the PlayStation division, there had been uncertainty about whether the console should focus primarily on 2D sprite-based graphics or 3D polygon graphics. After witnessing the success of Sega's Virtua Fighter in Japanese arcades, the direction became instantly clear. 3D polygon graphics would be PlayStation's primary focus. Teruhisa Tokunaka, SCE president, expressed gratitude for the timely release of Virtua Fighter, as it proved that 3D gaming was viable and appealing. The PlayStation's technical specifications were finalized in 1993, with the design completed in 1994. The system featured a 32-bit R3000A CPU made by LSI Logic, operating at 33.86 MHz and capable of 30 million instructions per second. The CPU relied heavily on the COP2 3D and Matrix Math coprocessor on the same die to render complex 3D graphics. The GPU drew 2D polygons and applied shading and textures. Sony's custom 16-bit sound chip supported ADPCM sources with up to 24 sound channels and offered CD-quality sampling rates up to 44.1 kHz with MIDI sequencing capabilities. The system included 2 MB of main RAM and 1 MB of video RAM, allowing for a maximum color depth of 16.7 million true colors with 32 levels of transparency. Resolution ranged from 256 by 224 to 640 by 480 pixels, with different games utilizing various resolutions. The PlayStation could output composite, S-video, or RGB signals through its AV multi-connector, with earlier models also featuring RCA connectors for composite output. Impressive specifications for 1994. On December 3, 1994, Sony released the PlayStation in Japan just 1 week after Sega launched the Saturn. Priced at 39,800 yen, approximately $387, the PlayStation enjoyed immediate success with long lines forming outside stores. Oga later recalled realizing PlayStation's importance when friends and relatives began begging for consoles for their children. The system sold 100,000 units on its first day and reached 2 million units within 6 months. Although the Saturn initially outsold the PlayStation in Japan due to the popularity of Virtua Fighter, PlayStation had sold 300,000 units by the end of 1994, compared to Saturn's 500,000 units. The PlayStation's North American debut came after a dramatic confrontation at E3 1995. During Sony's presentation, Olof Olofsson, head of SCEA, invited Steve Race to the stage. Race simply said $299 and left to thunderous applause.
$299.
Undercutting Sega's just announced $399 price point for the Saturn by $100. This price advantage and showcases of anticipated games like WipEout, Ridge Racer, and Tekken generated tremendous excitement. When the PlayStation launched in North America on September 9, 1995, it sold more units in 2 days than the Saturn had in 5 months. Nearly all of the initial 100,000 units were pre-sold, with retailers across the country quickly selling out of consoles and accessories. Launch titles like Ridge Racer and Battle Arena Toshinden were well received, with critics considering Ridge Racer superior to Sega's Daytona USA. At launch, the PlayStation offered 17 games, significantly more than Saturn's 6 launch titles. Ratio of games sold to consoles was impressive at 4-1. To meet surging demand, Sony chartered jumbo jets and increased production in Europe and North America. By early 1996, PlayStation had generated $2 billion, equivalent to almost $4 billion today, from worldwide hardware and software sales. European sales reached 2.2 million units, including 700,000 in the UK. Approximately 400 PlayStation games were in development, compared to 200 for Saturn and just 60 for Nintendo 64. The console's design evolved through several iterations. The original Japanese model, SCPH-1000, was the only version that featured an S-Video port. Subsequent models saw a reduction in external connectors, with the final version retaining just one serial port. Sony also marketed a development kit called Net Yaroza, meaning let's do it together in Japanese. Launched in June 1996 in Japan and released in other countries the following year, Net Yaroza allowed hobbyists to create games and share them via an online forum maintained by Sony. As PlayStation's popularity grew, Sony recognized the need to expand beyond traditional gaming demographics. Jeff Glendenning, hired as marketing manager in August 1994, identified an underserved market, 20-somethings with disposable income who had grown up playing Sega and Nintendo systems. Glendenning's background in the late 1980s rave and underground club scene informed his marketing approach. Rather than relying solely on television advertising, he focused on building relationships with opinion leaders in music, fashion, and underground media. The marketing strategy paid off brilliantly. By 1997, there were 52 clubs in the United Kingdom with dedicated PlayStation rooms where patrons could take a break from dancing to play the latest games. PlayStation became synonymous with the burgeoning club culture, blurring the lines between gaming and nightlife entertainment. Glendenning secretly allocated approximately £100,000 annually from the marketing budget to what he called a slush fund, allowing him to react quickly to promotional opportunities without going through lengthy corporate approval processes. This guerrilla marketing approach extended to music festivals as well. For the 1996 Glastonbury Festival, the company created a controversial cardboard flyer featuring the PlayStation logo and the provocative statement, "More powerful than God." The flyer was intentionally designed with serrated sections that could be torn off and used as filters for joints.
3, 2, 1, go.
The revolutionary racing game WipEout perfectly exemplified Sony's strategy of integrating gaming with youth culture. Developed by Liverpool-based Psygnosis, which Sony had acquired in 1993 for $48 million, WipEout featured futuristic hovercrafts racing through neon-lit landscapes. What set it apart was its soundtrack, licensed electronic music from established acts like the Chemical Brothers, Leftfield, and Orbital. The game's visual identity was crafted by the designers Republic, a Sheffield-based studio known for album covers and club flyers. WipEout wasn't just a game. It was a cultural touchstone that players could experience at home and then hear the same tracks while clubbing. Psygnosis proved to be a crucial acquisition for Sony's gaming ambitions. The studio's first encounter with PlayStation technology was memorable. Developers were astonished when shown a prototype in a locked room at their Liverpool offices. Artist Lee Karras recalled, "There was a massive, shiny metal box at one end of the room. We switched it on, clicked some buttons, browsed some menus, and all of a sudden a 3D polygon dinosaur came to life on screen. We were blown away." The experience inspired the team to push the boundaries of what games could be. Unlike Nintendo and Sega, which maintained tight control over their gaming ecosystems, Sony adopted an inclusive approach to third-party development. The PlayStation was designed to be programmer-friendly, using the Common C programming language and providing extensive documentation and support. Sony Computer Entertainment headquarters in London, California, and Tokyo housed technical support teams ready to assist external developers. Peter Molyneux of Bullfrog Productions praised Sony's approach, saying it was like being released from jail in terms of the freedom you have. The contrast with Nintendo's restrictive practices was stark. While Nintendo maintained tight control over cartridge manufacturing, prioritizing their own titles and charging high prices, Sony's CD-ROM strategy allowed for cheaper, faster production with greater creative latitude. By September 1995, PlayStation had established itself as the dominant force in the next-generation console market. The situation worsened for Sega when retailers like KB Toys dropped the Saturn entirely in response to Sega's surprise early launch, which had alienated many retail partners. PlayStation's advantage grew further when Nintendo delayed the Nintendo 64 to April 1996 in Japan and September 1996 in North America. The PlayStation's game library expanded rapidly, becoming one of its greatest strengths, while the Nintendo 64 would eventually feature iconic titles like Super Mario 64 and The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Its cartridge-based format limited both the quantity and scope of games. Final Fantasy VII, released in 1997, exemplified PlayStation's ability to deliver experiences impossible on cartridge-based systems. Spanning multiple discs and featuring pre-rendered cinematic sequences, orchestral music, and a lengthy narrative, the game sold 9.8 million copies worldwide. It marked a watershed moment for role-playing games, introducing the genre to mainstream Western audiences. Final Fantasy VIII and IX followed, selling 11 million copies combined. Another blockbuster franchise, Gran Turismo, debuted in 1997 and became the PlayStation's best-selling game with almost 11 million copies sold worldwide. As a racing simulator with unprecedented attention to vehicle physics and handling, Gran Turismo required 2 discs to accommodate its extensive car models, tracks, and audio files, something unthinkable on cartridge systems. The PlayStation also excelled in fighting games. Tekken 3, released in 1997, is considered the pinnacle of the series. It introduced 15 new characters, revised the combat system to facilitate combos, and emphasized sidestepping as a tactical element while reducing the role of jumping. When ported from the arcade, Tekken 3 retained most of its gameplay innovations, despite some necessary graphical compromises. Horror games found a natural home on the PlayStation as well. The original Resident Evil, released in 1996, established the survival horror genre with its atmospheric mansion setting, limited resources, and emphasis on tension rather than action. Metal Gear Solid, released in 1998, revolutionized stealth gameplay with its cinematic presentation and complex narrative. Both titles spawned successful franchises that continued across multiple PlayStation generations. Beyond these groundbreaking titles, PlayStation hosted diverse genres that appealed to players of all ages. Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon offered family-friendly platforming adventures, while series like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater captured the emerging extreme sports culture. The diverse library ensured PlayStation remained relevant throughout its lifespan. The introduction of the DualShock controller in November 1997 further enhanced the PlayStation experience. Named for its dual vibration motors that gave feedback based on game activity, the DualShock featured textured rubber grips on its analog sticks, longer handles, and refined shoulder buttons. These changes created a more immersive gaming experience and became the default controller for subsequent PlayStation models. Teiyu Goto, the original PlayStation controller designer, revealed that the geometric button symbols were chosen deliberately. Circle and cross represent yes and no, though this is reversed in Western versions. The triangle symbolizes a viewpoint, and the square represents a piece of paper for accessing menus. By 1998, Sega was struggling financially despite launching the technically superior 128-bit Dreamcast console. Sony still commanded 60% of the North American video game market at the end of 1999. The PlayStation's dominance was so complete that Sega executives reportedly returned their Dreamcasts to stores in exchange for PlayStation software. On March 2, 1999, Sony announced the PlayStation 2 featuring a graphics processor that Kutaragi claimed would push more raw polygons than any console in history, rivaling supercomputers of the era. Even as PlayStation 2 anticipation built, the original PlayStation continued selling strongly. In June 2000, Sony released the PS1, a smaller, redesigned variant that outsold all other consoles that year, including the PlayStation 2. While most consoles enjoy a 5 to 6 year life cycle before being discontinued, the PlayStation 1 remained in production until March 23, 2006, over 11 years after its initial release. By the time production ceased, the console and its compact counterpart had sold over 102 million units worldwide, with more than 962 million software units sold. Its emphasis on mature themes and content helped transition gaming's perception from children's entertainment to sophisticated interactive experiences for all ages. Glendenning noted that PlayStation took the age of the average gamer from about 14 to about 23, making gaming a respected part of popular culture rather than something people were embarrassed to admit enjoying. The iconic Double Life television commercial from 1999, created by the TBWA agency, perfectly captured this evolution. It featured diverse individuals describing how gaming allowed them to escape their ordinary lives and experience extraordinary adventures. The advertisement acknowledged gaming's role as escapism while celebrating the diversity of the PlayStation community. As the sixth-generation consoles emerged in the early 2000s, the original PlayStation remained relevant through backward compatibility. The PlayStation 2, launched in 2000, played most original PlayStation games flawlessly, allowing players to continue enjoying their libraries while transitioning to new hardware. This backward compatibility became a hallmark of the PlayStation brand, with the PlayStation 3 also supporting original PlayStation discs. This commitment to preserving gaming history differentiated Sony from competitors and built consumer loyalty. Late-era PlayStation games demonstrated how thoroughly developers had learned to exploit the console's architecture. Titles like Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone pushed the aging hardware to its maximum potential, selling over 8 million copies despite releasing years after the PlayStation 2's debut. Other notable late life cycle exclusives included Fear Effect 2, Retro Helix, Siphon Filter 3, C12, Final Resistance, Dance Dance Revolution Conomix, and Digimon World 3. Even after production ceased, the PlayStation maintained a devoted following among retro gaming enthusiasts. The simplicity of the hardware architecture made the PlayStation relatively straightforward to emulate on PCs, extending its cultural influence beyond the physical console. Bleem, a commercial PlayStation emulator released for Windows PCs and Dreamcast in 1999, allowed players to experience PlayStation games with improved visual fidelity, enhanced resolutions, and filtered textures. In 2018, Sony acknowledged the PlayStation's lasting cultural significance by releasing the PlayStation Classic, a miniaturized replica of the original console preloaded with 20 games. Priced at $99.99, the system was approximately 45% smaller than the original PlayStation and came bundled with 2 replica controllers, without analog sticks, an HDMI cable, and a USB Type-A cable for power. The PlayStation Classic ran games through the open-source PCSX emulator, making it essentially a dedicated emulation box with an authentic aesthetic. Though the PlayStation Classic received mixed reviews due to its limited game selection, emulation quality, and high initial price, it represented Sony's recognition of the original PlayStation's historical importance. Many longtime fans purchased it purely for nostalgic value, displaying it alongside their modern consoles as a tribute to gaming history. The PlayStation's massive game library, over 7,900 titles released during its lifespan, ensures that collectors and retro gaming fans still have plenty to discover. While iconic games like Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, and Gran Turismo remain the most sought-after titles, collectors increasingly appreciate overlooked gems that didn't receive attention during their initial release. The relative affordability of PlayStation games compared to cartridge-based systems makes collecting more accessible. Museums dedicated to technology and cultural history, including the Smithsonian American Art Museum and the Strong National Museum of Play, feature PlayStation consoles and games in their permanent collections. As gaming hardware continues to advance, the original PlayStation remains an essential reference point. The moment when 3D polygonal gaming became mainstream, when optical media replaced cartridges as the dominant format, and when gaming expanded beyond traditional demographics to become a mainstream entertainment medium. Its technical innovations, diverse software library, and cultural marketing strategy created the foundation upon which modern gaming was built. The PlayStation didn't merely win a console generation, it fundamentally transformed how games were made, marketed, and experienced. From nightclub installations to family living rooms, it established video games as a sophisticated entertainment medium with artistic and cultural significance beyond simple amusement. Thanks for joining me on this trip through the history of this legendary console. If there is any interesting gaming phenomena you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss more videos like this one. See you next time.